Laura and I both have our own history and work that we've been doing over the years separately from each other. One of the key ones, I guess, to note, and you can look it up, and please do look it up afterwards, is that Laura founded Mitzvah Day, which is an amazing one day of social action in the Jewish community. And Mitzvah Day is amazing in that it's a one day of social action, encouraging people to volunteer and do things together. Certainly originally started very much with the Jewish community, and now has a massive kind of interfaith element to it as well. And I was very inspired and motivated by it, and basically shamelessly copied it with her permission, and set up Siddiqi Day, which, for those that don't know the word Sadaqah, often for Muslims is translated in sometimes a rather frustrating way as just meaning giving money to charity, and actually it means much more about service and giving yourself your time. So I set Siddiqi Day up a couple of years ago, and now we have them both running. I don't ever claim to be anywhere near Mitzvah Day, certainly not yet anyway, but certainly the inspiration and the sort of connections have been brilliant. And through that we've developed a friendship and a trust, which for me is a very important one. So our work is separate, but we also do some things together. And we came over the last sort of few years, certainly Baroness Varsi was a key person in the discussions that we had, where she called us both into her office at a kind of off-the-record chat to say, look, we really need to do something with women in both communities. There's a challenge around leadership, gender, and actually there's a lot more similarity in that stuff in both communities than most people realise. And so we had an initial meeting with her at her office, talked about what kinds of things we could do. We had an event at the Foreign Office, and many women came, about 150 or so women came that day, and we were kind of amazed and blown away a bit. But the thing that really struck me, and still does to now, with everything that we're doing, is that women, with respect to all of the lovely men here, and I'm very happy that there are men here, women can often do things differently. One of the things that we have felt, and it becomes, always apparent in lots of different ways in our communities, and I'm familiar with the Muslim community, but also with the Jewish community as well, is that a lot of the leadership positions, if you like, in our organisations, and a lot of the decision making are done by men, and women. But women have a lot to offer and a lot of power, soft power, I would say, but it's also very powerful power that we need to harness and utilise a lot more, and that women can do things in slightly different ways. And certainly at that meeting at the Foreign Office and other events that we've had locally in areas and also nationally, realise that when women get together, there's some sort of magic that happens that is actually very different to when it's a mixed group, although that has its place as well. Of course, there's a lot of hatred. We know about perhaps anti-Semitism. Many people know, perhaps not to the extent of the problem. We've heard the statistics around that's growing. We also know, of course, that anti-Muslim hatred and a general misunderstanding and misconceptions about Islam and Muslims are absolutely apparent, and I guess on the rise as well. How much of that is similar and how much of that is different to each other is something that I think needs more discussion. It isn't the same thing, but there are similarities, and there are certainly points at which we can come together and work on those things a lot more. And I think that women actually can play much more of a crucial role than we've been playing up to now. I've been involved in interfaith dialogue and work over the years, and I'm sure many of you have as well. And there are some brilliant things, and I never really dismiss any of that, because I think all of it has a part to play in where we're at now in our story, in our journey as faith communities, as Muslims in Britain. But I do think there are certain elements of that work which haven't worked as well as they need to. One of the elements I feel is, again, harnessing women, but also the Muslim and Jewish dynamic within our communities. There are a whole load of reasons for that, and of course one of the big ones will be what's happening abroad. What happens in the Middle East has a massive impact on people here, both Jews and Muslims, and others of course as well. And we can't sort of deny that. We never claim to say that isn't happening. And it has a massive impact. All Jews in Britain, one way or another, have a link with Israel. Muslims are very passionate in the main about what's happening there and things that they feel are unjust, etc. So these things are very, very deep-rooted. They're very important for people, and for us to somehow feel that that's not happening or to deny it is in itself not a good idea. But it also does mean that we have to think about how do we bring those issues in. So at the moment, I mean, we decided then that we needed to set something up as a sort of formal structure. How we do it and how it goes forward was always a challenge with these things. The Jewish community are very much concentrated only really a few areas of the country. There are more Muslims, and we're spread around in lots more different places. So to even think about having local groups, which is the model that we chose to adopt really, where we have local groups around the country. At the moment we have 16. I think by the end of the year we'll have 20, 25 local or different types of groups. And the idea is that we have those local groups in different areas, Bradford, Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester, where there are Jews, and we match up a Jewish woman and a Muslim woman, and they have to co-chair that local group. So it's very much shared. Everything we do is shared, because we think that's an important dynamic. I think Laura will talk a bit more about that in a minute. So we've sort of looked at where there are Jews and can we develop a group in that area and match people up or encourage them to develop those groups through friendships that they already have. We've set it up as an independent, an organisation, a community interest company, which with charitable aims, and which will move now towards becoming a charity. So any of you that are involved in that stuff, you know, there's a whole load of stuff that has to be done with that I personally can't do. So we have other people that are doing that for us, because that's something that has to happen. You need policies in place, you need proper plans, you need to have governance, you need a board. We have a board now, which is brilliant. So we're sort of moving in that direction, while at the same time trying to, I think, inspire and lead this work that's so important in the current climate that we're in. So what do we actually do? As I say, we have local groups. We have 16 of them, which will grow. We also have tried to develop special interest groups, so groups where women have things in common, business. We have a group that I think is emerging from the city, teachers, students. We really want to try and work with students. Again, I feel that the work on campuses over the years has almost always been defined through the JSOC, the ISOC models, which ends up becoming all related to what's happening abroad. You know, there's very little work that's been able to happen with Jewish and Muslim students that's connected to art, for example, or music, or social action, or charity work outside. That it often tends to become a point where anybody who's half interested, that's what they end up talking about, and of course it becomes very problematic. What we say to groups, and what we will try and work through with students as we go forward, is that is very important what's happening there. We somehow have to be able to find ways to work on this work here without saying it's not happening, but not making it the thing. And for us, one of the most important things, which isn't a wishy-washy thing, it's actually a strategic aim of these things is this thing about friendship. If you have friendship and trust, you can pretty much do anything, you know. But as we all know, any friendship takes time, and you have to work at it. It doesn't happen by itself. You need people to trust each other, to get to know each other. So Laura and I now can pretty much talk about anything. Husbands, kids, family, dogs, cats, the big world, the small world, our area, the community stuff, the frustrating things in our community, the gender leadership issues, whatever it is. And also, yes, if we wanted to, and we do sometimes, but not that often, talk about what's happening in the Middle East and try and understand where each other's communities are perhaps coming from. So that's only there because I can do that, because we've worked at this friendship and put it right at the heart of what we do and what Nisa-Nashim is about. So it's not a wishy-washy kind of, oh, it would be nice if we get people together to have more food together, although that's obviously very nice. There is also an aim to it, and an actual crucial part of what we're doing are encouraging those and saying to them, don't put the Middle East at the table without having that built around it, because it just won't work. From experience they've had in America with this similar sort of work, it doesn't happen. And so that's kind of giving you a bit of an overview, I hope. Ooh, already at 10 minutes, so over to you to carry on.
So it's lovely to be here today. Thanks for having me, and real pleasure. And what we thought I would do is talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we're encountering and how we're going about them, and a little bit also about how we're going to move forwards. So as Julie said, I set up a thing called Mitzvah Day, and it's about social action, and it's Jewish. It's called Mitzvah Day, and Mitzvah is a commandment, it's Jewish. And it's become something that's that's interfaith, but fundamentally it starts off in the Jewish community, the Jewish values. And what we realised as we got to know each other was what we needed was something that was a partnership between Jews and Muslims. Because the only way to build these relationships is if you have a sort of level playing field. If you genuinely believe that the other one is your partner, not trying to influence you, not one is in a more powerful position or one is in a subservient position or one isn't, you have to be partners. So we made very clear decision that Nisa-Nashim, Nisa-Nashim means women in Arabic and Hebrew. So we chose a name that was basically the same. We put them side by side together, and we made a decision that everything we did was be a partnership. But it's not that easy because the two communities are very different. And the Jewish community has been in Britain for mostly about 120 years. We've gone through the growing pains. The Jewish community is very small. It's about 300,000 versus about 3 million Muslims, so we're about 10% of the size. Economically, we are largely better off, because we've been here longer, we've established the systems, we've worked our way through the British system. We are based in the south. There's almost no Jews or very few Jews in the Midlands or the north. So we're a very different type of community, and the two communities have different issues and different needs. So if we're going to set up this partnership, we have to do it very deliberately and very clearly to make that work. And there are lots of similarities, even though there are lots of differences between the communities, there are lots of similarities. So we are both immigrant communities, but the similarities go much deeper than that. We have the same dependence on family. We believe in things like modesty and dress. We have the same scriptures. There's an enormous amount of similarity between the Jews and the Muslims. And what we decided to do is to focus on those. Now, the similarities, a lot of them are negative as well as positive. So, for example, we have both communities feel under threat. Both communities, when they feel under threat, move into their own little silos and sort of close up. And the Jewish community has done that big time. So, in the Jewish community, 60%, that's 60% of Jewish children go to Jewish schools. All right? Now, that's huge. And if you look at the ultra-Orthodox community, it will be 100%. So it moves sort of less as you get more and more secular in the community. But it means not only are the Jewish kids in Jewish schools, but it means that they don't meet the non-Jewish kids. The non-Jewish kids don't meet the Jews. The parents don't meet at the school gates. So whilst it makes the Jews feel safer and it helps them, a very small community, to build its own identity, it actually builds a silo at the same time. So how do you work around that? And the Muslim community, we see the same thing. When you feel under threat, you close in. And that's sort of natural. And then we also mistrust each other. So we don't just trust the outside world that all hates us. We particularly mistrust each other. And therefore the problems are quite profound in terms of how do you set up something that will bring those barriers down. The next challenge we face is a sort of broader one, which is the whole political climate, which Julie talked about. So hate crime in Britain, according to the Home Office, went up 19% last year. And when you look specifically at crime against Muslims or crimes against Jews, it's miles higher than that. I mean, the CST said that the figure on anti-Semitic attacks or crimes last year went up 37%. And Mama will tell us, in some cases, depending on how you define it, it's gone up 100%. It's gone up massively in the Muslim community. So we're both feeling that same sense of threat, as are people who are gay or people who are black or people who are disabled. It's not just our problem, but it is a very specific problem for Jews and for Muslims. We also face another challenge, which is deliberate attempts to drive us apart. So we've been relatively lucky on this, but we have one big event where we were setting up the Manchester group, and we were bombarded with hate tweets about it, particularly telling the organisers in Manchester not to have us, particularly me, because I'm Jewish and I was at the Board of Deputies and we're Zionists and why would you want us there? And so there are people deliberately trying to drive us apart, and we've sort of so far managed to shrug it off and say, well, that actually just shows us how important the work we're doing is, and we've absolutely taken that as an indicator of doing more, not of less. But it could reach the stage where it got scary, which it hasn't yet. You know, lots of people are targeted in very frightening ways, and we're just hoping that doesn't happen. Another challenge we have is, as Julie said, we set up 16 local groups. Now, I don't know how many of you are involved in volunteering things, but we're big time involved in volunteering things, and Julie's been setting up a whole Muslim network to look at volunteering in the Muslim community. But it's hard work. We're trying to get people in Manchester to set up a group and then get their friends and their contacts to come along to things. Managing volunteers is a whole art in itself. And on the scale that we're doing it, it really is. So there's a whole challenge there in how do you manage this to keep hold of it and to actually get it to grow. And then the final challenge that I want to talk about is, where is this going? So, okay, it's a challenge to get middle-class women like us talking to each other and setting up groups around the country. Well, that's hard and that's important, but actually it's not the job. The job is going to be to disseminate this sort of issues to a much wider world. So how do we reach people who've never met a Jew, which must be thousands of Muslims in Britain have never met a Jew? How do we meet people? How do we reach out to people who hate Jews? Or how do we reach out to people who have met a Muslim, because most Jews will have met a Muslim in a much smaller community, but don't have any as friends, and don't really want to have any as friends, and really think that they're a bit... So how do we reach out beyond the people who are interested in... People who come here, you know, the people who come here are people who are interested. How do we go beyond that phase? And how do we use our volunteer networks to actually reach much deeper into the difficult, hard to reach, more... Prejudice is a really negative word, but people with negative perceptions that are much, much stronger than the ones that we start off with. And believe me, the people we know have got negative enough perceptions. So how do we do that? So that's the really big challenge that we're going to face.